I read all 6 of Jane Austen's main novels in 1 year, and she completely changed me. Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley and I am a Christian wife, homeschooling mother of 3, out to redeem my very own literary education. And you cannot redeem your very own literary education without reading the most well-known classic author of all time, Jane Austen. So, in 2024, I declared Jane Austen my female author of the year, and my goal was to get to as many works of hers as possible. I made it to all 6 of her main novels. I did not make it to her unfinished novels. She has a few unfinished works. I have those in a single collection. The Watsons and Sanditon and Lady Susan. I didn't get to those, but I made it to all six of her main novels. I had only ever read Pride and Prejudice before last year, and I loved it. It was a book I had already read at least 2 or 3 times, and I never read anything else by Jane Austen. And why? Who knows? But in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my favorites. I'm going to be ranking Jane Austen's books based on my favorites, and just talking about some of my favorite characters and what makes Jane Austen such a great author. So we're just going to start with my favorites because that's the easiest way to talk about all of the books. And my very first Jane Austen, which is a favorite, which is no surprise, is Pride and Prejudice. Now, we're going to start with this one because this is her most popular work, because it is her best work. Jane Austen shines in this one. Everyone knows the story of Elizabeth and Darcy. Everyone knows how ridiculous Elizabeth's family is. Mr. Collins, as a ridiculous character, makes the whole book in itself. So I'm not going to talk too much about this one, and it's why we're going to go ahead and get this one out of the way. This is still my favorite. If you've never read any Jane Austen, you should read Pride and Prejudice, because at the very least, it lets you enter the conversation of Jane Austen, because most everyone has read this. However, it's not fair to compare all of Jane Austen's other works to Pride and Prejudice, because this is just one of those great books. So we're going to set this one aside. You should read it if you haven't. I still love it, but we're not going to compare the other ones to this one. So moving along, my very favorite Jane Austen apart from Pride and Prejudice was Mansfield Park. And this one shocked me because it's probably Jane Austen's least popular work. And that's mostly to do because of the heroine. In Mansfield Park, we follow Fanny Price, who is an incredibly introverted, shy, somewhat sickly heroine. So she's not your interesting, witty, lively heroine like Elizabeth. She's not necessarily beautiful. There's not that much that really recommends her other than her virtue. This book is the definition of the Bible verse that says, "Charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who loves the Lord is to be praised." Because Fanny is a woman who loves the Lord. She is incredibly virtuous, and sort of her antagonist in this book is the mean girl that kind of tries to be your best friend, but it's also her love rival. Mary Crawford is the definition of charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. So the love interest in this book is drawn to Mary because she's charming and she's beautiful, but she has a really bad heart and really questionable morals. And Mary Crawford and her brother Henry come to Mansfield Park to kind of just mess up the lives of everyone there. I think Mary Crawford is honestly Jane Austen's strongest villain of all her works, even though Fanny Price is probably one of her weaker heroines. This book for Mary Crawford alone is worth the read, but I personally was very endeared by Fanny. So this is kind of a Cinderella story for her. She grows up in a poor family, and her aunt and uncle, who are rich and own Mansfield Park, decide to sort of adopt her and take care of her. And they bring her up within their home amongst her cousins. However, because Fanny is not technically part of the family, she's pushed aside and is constantly reminded that she's second class. She is lower tier than them. And it just breaks your heart for her. But she's so kind and good and gentle and right that you love her. This is her Cinderella story. And if you haven't read Mansfield Park, I would highly recommend giving it a try. It was really fun to read about a shy character because you never see that. It's all these rah-rah, bold women, which is great. I love it. But there are girls out there that exist like this too, and I loved it. So I can't recommend this one enough. This was my second favorite. And my third favorite Jane Austen is Northanger Abbey. This one made me laugh and smile so much because it is a Gothic satire. So this is a story that makes fun of the Gothic story, you know, where the heroine kind of gets kidnapped or whisked away, or something happens in this spooky abbey, or there's murder or intrigue, just all of the really sensational things that happened in Gothic literature. Jane Austen took that and turned it into a satire. So she's kind of poking fun at those things while still honoring the Gothic novel and love of literature and reading. So she didn't mock it in a way to say that it wasn't worth anything. She just took it in a light that made it fun. And so in Northanger Abbey, once again, we follow an unassuming heroine, and her name is Catherine Morland. She's also not very beautiful, not very smart, doesn't really have anything to recommend to her. She's just kind of this quirky, good-natured, naive girl who, because she's lived in a loving home in a small village, she knows nothing about the world and the true evils that are out there. She just kind of knows what she reads in these really sensational Gothic novels. And her neighbors take her to Bath, where she meets her love interest, Henry Tilney, and starts to realize that the world isn't exactly what it seems to be. She also meets another female character like Mary Crawford, who is also the antagonist, is portraying to be her friend when she's really not. And what I loved about this book is that Catherine is being enlightened throughout the book. So she's really naive at first, but she starts to learn and pick up pretty quickly that the world isn't what it seems to be. And I loved that. Almost all of Jane Austen's books, the characters grow so much throughout the novel in a really genuine way. And that's one of the things that makes Jane Austen so great. And I also loved the love story in this one because it was very normal. There wasn't anything that was overly romantic about it. She just liked this guy, made it known in a respectful way that she liked him, which wasn't normal. And he was endeared to her by that. And so I loved that as well. This was probably one of my favorite love stories apart from Pride and Prejudice, but because this one was just so normal. But yeah, Northanger Abbey. Definitely give this one a try, and give it a try in the fall because there are some Gothic and fun elements in it. So it'd be a good light read for the fall. My next favorite Jane Austen that makes it to number 4 on the list is Sense and Sensibility. And in this book, we follow two sisters, Marianne and Eleanor Dashwood, and all of their trials in love, so to speak. One sister, Eleanor, is a sister of sense. She's incredibly prudent and even-tempered and always knows the right thing to do. And then you have Marianne, who is the sister of sensibilities, whose feelings are just all over the place and out there, and she kind of goes through some love trials that, yeah, would be expected of someone with that personality. And Eleanor is more reserved and kind of locks her feelings away, which really hurts her in this one. And I could not put this book down just because I was that determined to see Eleanor Dashwood have a happy ending. I loved her as a heroine. She is probably one of my favorite Jane Austen heroines because she is the one I want to be the most like. She is so even-tempered. Jane Austen is really good at writing these female rival characters that are just so mean. But to see the way Eleanor Dashwood handled that situation very respectfully, very even-tempered, I want to be like her. There's a side character in this book, Colonel Brandon, who really deserved his own happy ending. So that was another character that I found that I was rooting for, but I enjoyed this one as well. And I need to note, now that we're at the bottom of this pile, All of these Jane Austen books are still my favorite. So although these last two come in at number 5 and number 6, they still rank some of my top 20 books of all time. So don't let them being at the bottom of the list make you think that they're not good. But number 5 on the list is Persuasion. And this one I put near the bottom, not because it was bad, because it wasn't bad, but because it just made me ache for the heroine. So in this one, we're following Anne, who rejected the man that she loved when he proposed to her the first time around because her family convinced her to. She was persuaded to tell him no because he wasn't good enough for her. So he leaves heartbroken. She's still heartbroken, but feels like she's done the right thing by her family. But like 8 years later, he comes back. He's made a name for himself. He's successful. And he starts to kind of be in search for a wife around Anne. And I just, oh my gosh, all of the tension in this book, all of the heartache in this book, it really kind of tore me up. So that's why I'm kind of putting it at the end, is because it just made me cringe so much, but not in a bad way. It hurt me, okay? It hurt me. However, because of that, it had one of the most satisfying endings of all of Jane Austen's books. So, this one was fun, but you hurt me on this one, Jane Austen. You really did. And last, but absolutely not least, is Emma. And in this one, we find another heroine who experiences a lot of character growth. So we follow Emma, who is a high society, upper class lady who still lives with her father. She is the mistress of the home because her older sister's married and moved out and her mother passed away. So she's kind of the woman who has her own bearings and her own independence to do what she wants. So she says that she is never getting married, but that does not stop her from meddling in the lives of other people and their love affairs. And this one also just really made me cringe. At the beginning of Emma, I just didn't like it because I just didn't like her. I thought, oh my goodness, I could just see the ruining of happiness of everyone that Emma was doing because she was meddling in people's life. And it bothered me and I didn't like it. However, I trusted Jane Austen because of all of the other Jane Austen books I read. So I knew Emma was going to grow in this book. And she was. She learned from her mistakes. She was humbled. And she grew a lot through her choices and trying to learn how to make the right ones. It's like every time she made a mistake, she learned from it. And she grew from it. And she didn't necessarily do it again. So I did appreciate that. But this one was kind of slower for me because it just felt like she was meddling in everyone else's life, and it didn't really feel like it was getting to the point of her own happiness and story. However, by the end of it, even though this was probably my least favorite book, it also had one of my favorite love stories because, like how Elizabeth and Darcy make each other better, they grow because of one another and become better people. And just like Catherine Morland in Northanger Abbey grows to be a better woman because of Henry Tilney, Emma grows to be a better woman because of Mr. Knightley. And their relationship is they were always friends. He was kind of an acquaintance of her father who always visited and was close with the family, so he was always around her. And so she never really thought of him as a love interest until it seemed like there was possibility for him in other ways to find love. And so that was just, it was fun. It was fun to see another kind of understated romance, but one that was really, really true and powerful come to life. Emma never realized that she wanted to get married because, you know, she had just never thought of Mr. Knightley, and she should have. So yeah, I loved this one. Not my favorite just because the first half was kind of slow, but the second half made me love it. So don't think just because it's number 6 on the list means that it's not great. But also for Jane Austen as my female author of the year, I didn't just stop at her 6 main novels. I also read Jane Austen at Home, which is a biography about Jane Austen's life written by Lucy Worsley. And it's written in the context of all of the places Jane Austen lived and the people that she was connected to and what her life looked like in those places. And I loved this book because it gave such an insight into who she was and how she was shaped, and most importantly, how she shaped her stories. So many of her stories and characters were inspired by real life events. And when you start to read that book, especially if you've read these works, you make all of those connections like, I see what inspired that book or that love story or that plot line. And it was so interesting. I found it fascinating that Jane Austen started her day with piano. So not only was she a great writer, but she was also a pretty talented pianist, which is very interesting. And then she would sort of write her books in her head while she was doing mundane tasks. So while she was doing her sewing and things like that, she would get an idea, put her sewing down, and go write down in her little book for her story. So very fascinating. If you love Jane Austen and you want to learn more about her, I highly recommend Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley. Now, after reading all 6 of Jane Austen's novels, I would say that it did change me. Number 1, and this one's kind of funny, it changed my vocabulary. You don't read that much Jane Austen without some of it coming out of your mouth. And anytime I would say something like, well, it's of little consequence to me, I would be like, okay, that's from Jane Austen. And even my husband noticed at times that I was, talking a little different because of Jane Austen, which is fine. Actually, that's more elevated speech. I live in the South, and I'm sure this sounds a lot more elegant than what I would normally speak like. So that was just kind of an interesting side effect of reading so much Jane Austen at once. But another thing I got from the Jane Austen books was that I want to live a life more so in beauty and out of doors. So in the books, there wasn't radio, there wasn't television in this time. All of these characters are taking walks out in the gardens and along the paths, and it just sounds so beautiful and delightful that I would love to incorporate that in our own home. So I would love to do some landscaping. I would love to create some paths to walk around in or a beautiful garden. So it just kind of inspired me in that way. And it also inspired me to become more accomplished. Why not learn how to play the piano? Why not learn how to draw? These were things that in these characters' times were seen as really great pursuits for women, and it's one that with the rise of technology, a lot of us have just kind of stopped pursuing. So that's something else I would like to do after reading all 6 of Jane Austen's novels. But I had so much fun reading her books in one year. I loved having a female author of the year and really honing in on one person because I feel like I got a better idea of who Jane Austen was as an author and what her writing style was. And to me, after reading all of her books, I think she was so great because she was phenomenal at capturing the true quirks of human nature. When you read her characters, they're just not these bland cookie cutter people. They have really unique quirks. Like there is one lady who only kind of talks about dress and outfits. That's all she cares about. And there's lots of other little nuances in every single character that just makes them feel unique and like a real person. And she's also really witty. Like Jane Austen is worth the read for her wit and her humor. It's something that all of these years later in modern times we can still relate to because even though maybe technology has changed, human nature really hasn't. So there's still some of those vices and virtues that there were back then here today, which is why Jane Austen can still be read in the modern day and be enjoyed. So if you've never read Jane Austen, I highly recommend it. And just a note, if you pick up these beautiful penguin cloth bound editions of Jane Austen, which are incredibly lovely, if you do actually read them and don't just keep them on your shelf as a display, they do kind of start to wear off and get a worn look to them. Like I think, for example, my Persuasion book, you almost can't read the title anymore because I read this. Now, I'm a little bit hard on my books because I have 3 kids and I pack them around with me everywhere I go, so they do kind of get tossed around. But I just think that's something to note. I would still buy them because I think they're beautiful, and I think the worn look is actually a good look on it. You know, looks like you read your books. But just something to know before you buy them. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite Jane Austen book is, or what Jane Austen book you're most excited to read next. My 2025 Female Author of the Year is Lucy Maud Montgomery, who is the author of the Anne of Green Gables series and also wrote a lot of other fiction. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe to my channel and follow along, and I will see you next time. Happy reading, friends!